Oh, hi, sorry, I didn't see you there. I was just busy reading my incredibly tiny copy of Death Note Volume 1. It's a little small, but everything's there. Death Note is a certified classic and has always been my go-to recommendation for people wanting to get into anime and manga. Its engaging cat and mouse mind battle games have certainly stood the test of time, but it's the philosophical nature of Death Note that has really cemented it in anime culture. The foundation of human morals rests on one question. Under what circumstances is it okay to kill someone? Who deserves to make that choice, and who deserves to die? The average person would say no one. Heck, you might say no one. But before you answer, Death Note has one more question to ask you. What if you were really good at killing people, and also it made a girl horny when you did it? Not so sure of yourself now, are you? But as much as I like Death Note, there's one thing I can't help but notice. Towards the end, Death Note gets bad, and it's a weird type of bad. There's a clear point where the quality just drops, and the series just stops feeling like Death Note, and instead becomes what it thinks Death Note is supposed to be. It feels like it's afraid to make that final jump and just conclude. So it treks on, telling you that we will be parting ways soon, but don't go yet, because it will be lonely. But first, before we find out why Death Note gets bad, let's find out why it was good. The date is December 3rd, 2003, and Death Note as we know it would appear in the widely popular Weekly Shonen Jump. Now, being in Weekly Shonen Jump is a pretty high honor, but it does come with substantial risk. Weekly Shonen Jump is notoriously cutthroat, series often being culled before they've even had the chance to gain a new audience. Reader attention is the currency, and if you're not bringing it in, well, maybe your replacement will be more successful. It's a fight to be noticed, and everything is stacked against the newer series. At the time of Death Note's first issue, it was sharing pages with series like One Piece, Naruto, Hunter x Hunter, iShield 21, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Prince of Tennis, Bo. Industry titans that can easily devour the valuable attention of readers. But Death Note was different. The one common thread of similarity between those aforementioned series is that they are all very motion heavy. Pages are filled with swift strikes, heavy blows, fast-paced action, and I also assume an engaging plot is in there somewhere. All things an audience of young teens to kids would absolutely adore. But Death Note went in a new direction. Death Note isn't a particularly violent series, not in a physical fighting sense. You won't see anyone throwing punches infused with fighting spirits that leave a sweeping motion ending in a devastating impact. Death Note's approach to fighting is slower and more methodical. Battles are for the most part silent, fought not through beatings, but through deceit and manipulation. Death Note is a series where the most valuable thing a character can have is information, and the intelligence to utilize it to its full potential. The reward for victory isn't earning a new super move, but the satisfaction of seeing a meticulously thought out plan come to fruition, and inching yourself closer to victory with a god, meaning that those punches and kicks that defined those other series are completely absent in Death Note's pages, instead being replaced with the sharp expressions of Takashi Obata, all of which still retain the same impact as any physical strike. Let's also consider what Death Note is about. If you call an anime or a manga series a shonen, it already conjures up the image of young kids using the power of friendship and believing in themselves to overcome some great evil, or win a sports game. Death Note is about the opposite. Author Tsugumi Ohba isn't writing about a noble hero trying to save the world, but a megalomaniac trying to control it. And we know the rest of the story. Death Note managed to not only survive, but thrive and ascend to one of Shonen Jump's most well-renowned series. Heck, I'd say their most renowned. That's not true. That's not even close to being true. Look at this Misa I got. I love her. She's the best. I sure hope they just don't erase everything that made her a good character and then delegate her to a Stepford wife. Because that would suck. The story of Death Note is one that doesn't really need an introduction. You kind of just learn it through osmosis around puberty. I did anyway, so I'm just going to assume you did as well. I had very few points of references back then. That's what I call my close friends. I'm going to tell you anyway. Shinigami, or gods of death, are very real, and really very bored. They spend their times mulling around without purpose in the desolate Shinigami realm, gambling, writing names in their death notes, a small diary they use to harvest souls, day after day for all eternity. Then, one day, a Shinigami named Ryuk decides to drop his death note in the human realm, just to see what would happen. It's picked up by a boy named Light Yagami, who decides to, as he puts it, rid the world of all evil and reign over Utopia as its god, which is a fancy way of saying he plans to murder criminals and people he doesn't like. Once the bodies start piling up, he is dubbed Kira. The Death Note itself is a compelling tool. It's the main narrative driving force, so it's important to get accustomed to it. It's both simple to understand, but at the same time deeply complex, bordering on needlessly confusing. It contains a ton of rules about its usage, but honestly, most are not relevant to the story whatsoever. While its extensive rules of ownership wouldn't be a bad thing to try and understand, you're better off just ignoring it, for your own sanity. I can't sit like this anymore. The only steadfast rule you need to know is that the Death Note will kill anyone whose name is written in it, provided you know their full name and what they look like. Once you write their name, their fate is sealed. Unless you happen to meet one of the two requirements that imply you can actually beat the Death Note, but honestly, it's not important. Those literally never come up in the story. A name and a face are the two most valuable things you can have in Death Note. Light spending day after day gathering the identities of criminals and culling the world. And just when he begins to feel unstoppable, a problem arises. A certain someone begins to take notice. The faceless and nameless genius detective, known only as L, who too vows to rid the world of all evil, Light being that evil. The two declaring that they will hunt down the other and kill them. The dichotomy between Light and L is the cornerstone of Death Note. The future success owes it all to how the relationship between Light and L develop, going from sworn enemies to something that can be seen as friends. Almost all relationships in Death Note contain a duality to them. Very rarely are characters honest with how they truly feel about someone. For instance, Light using Misa's affection towards him as a way to manipulate her, and in turn, Misa's friendly and bubbly personality is masking a darkness, as her loyalty towards Light means that she's willing to kill even those closest to her, just to make him happy. Relationships are seen as transactional and dishonest, meaning that there's this ever-present underlining tension within Death Note, as at any point the courteous kayfabe can just crumble, and you're reminded that this is a battle between life and death. So when you see one that goes against that, you begin to take notice. It's not possible to talk about Death Note without mentioning Light and L. They are one of the most iconic duos in anime and manga history. A feat I think is accomplished through a series of clever deceptions, one that lulls the audience into thinking that these two are actually friendly, before shattering that illusion. This is achieved by separating the characters of Light and L into two identities, Light and Kira, and L and Ryuzaki. The two's first interaction is through the identities of Kira and L. Here we are taught that they, on a deep fundamental level, are incompatible. The two cannot exist in a world while the other does. Their pride simply won't allow it. Kira seeing his crusade as just and his judgment as divine, and L seeing him as a murderer who is not exempt from the laws of man. The two are so steadfast that they are correct. As enemies, they play dangerous games. Through proxy, they stalk, antagonize, and manipulate each other, constantly putting themselves and others at risk, all in the name of justice. Nothing is off limits when you really want the other guy dead. But there really is only so much you can do through proxy. At some point, Juliet and Romeo have gotta meet. The story bring Kira and Elle together. They're forced to occupy the same space, amplifying that ever-present sense of tension. Now, every move that Kira makes will be under heavy scrutiny. Suddenly, his freedoms and his places he can escape to have narrowed down. As for L, his tightly kept identity is now at risk of being discovered. He's been placed into a shark tank without any repellent. This situation forces L and Kira to rely on their other identities to survive: Light and Ryuzaki. Unlike L and Kira, who are cold, meticulous, and paranoid, Light and Ryuzaki are far more personable, the two using these identities to fly under each other's radar and navigate sensitive social situations. And that's when Death Note goes in a really interesting direction. Light and Ryuzaki become friends. Through spending time with each other, the two find common ground, Light considering Ryuzaki to be the only person to match his intelligence, and Ryuzaki considering Light to be his first ever friend. The way they talk, understand each other, rely on each other, you can really feel a genuine friendship building between them. Death Note even experiments with this by completely removing the Kira identity from Light, and showing how it's only really the Death Note that makes them rivals. If it wasn't there, they could always be like this, giving authenticity to those moments of friendship. It begins to eclipse their rivalry, and you see these two in a new light, which is Death Note's biggest lie, because while Light and Ryuzaki like each other, L and Kira fucking hate each other. This dynamic means that at any point, Light and Ryuzaki could be having a friendly conversation, only for the tone to completely shift, as L and Kira stare each other down, trying to decipher what the other is thinking in order to plan their next move. And every time it's a harsh reality check. This is a death game, and someone has to win and someone has to lose. You're constantly being flipped from one extreme to the other, never quite sure where to settle yourself. You are just a casualty in L and Kira's game. There's this moment exclusive to the anime, where Ryuzaki and Light are talking in the rain. And it's a really powerful moment. It perfectly encapsulates the complicated dynamic the two have, how they're both unable to separate themselves fully from L and Kira. Ryuzaki crushed the find that Light is just a mask for Kira. And after they sit on the stairs and Ryuzaki offers to dry Light off, in a scene indicative of Jesus wiping the feet of Judas. Ryuzaki begins to drip water on Light, so Light takes a towel and dries him off. And this is such an important moment. For the first time, Light has expressed genuine kindness. Up until this point, we've seen him do nothing but lie, manipulate, and murder. He won't do anything unless it benefits him in some way. But to see him help someone because he looks like they needed a friend, it shows that there must have been something real under all that deceit. Only for him to kill L a few moments later. In Death Note, I mostly felt bad for L. He's always been a loner, but when he joins a team, I couldn't help but feel it emphasized his isolation. His single-mindedness to solve the Kira case at any cost, more often than not, angered the people he worked with. And as fond as he was of those people, none of them really seemed to like him. That is until Light came along, and we see how well they work together and support each other, and on some level that they are the same. That emotional investment connects you to them. It makes the impact of L's death so tragic, because you believed that there was something there to hold on to. I knew that L was going to die before I finished my first watching of Death Note, and yet I just couldn't believe it. Seeing Light and L's friendship build up, I really couldn't fathom a world where one of them dies. And while reading and watching Death Note again to make this, there was still a little voice in my head that told me maybe this time, things would be different. Battles in shonen anime are a time for the characters to put all their cards on the table and test their grit. By the end of it, the protagonist might be able to out-talk the bad guy and get them to see the error of their ways. A move typically referred to as talk no jutsu, or maybe they'll just be beaten into submission. But Death Note isn't about changing minds. L and Light's massive ego won't allow them to lose. Neither will be satisfied until there's a clear winner and loser, meaning battles in Death Note work more like a tennis match. Death Note is a sports anime. Battles consisting typically of two characters delivering single, devastating strikes at each other, meant to kill. So when either one of them launches an attack, you always feel like this is it. This is the move that will win them the game, only for the other to return the strike with something just as devastating. This is the underlying philosophy of Death Note's battles. Hit fast, hit hard, and make sure you aim for the jugular, because you don't want them to fight back. This makes these skirmishes escalate, the characters learning that in order to win, you need to take bold and dangerous risks, and test your resolve in the name of fighting or aiding Kira. Characters are pushed to their limit, forced to think on their feet or conduct elaborate multi-stage plans just to get a one-up on their opponent. Everyone has such a unique way of problem solving, you're always going to be constantly surprised about what people are capable of. But of course, the standout fights involve Light and L. Being the most intelligent of the cast, their plans are complex and they're dumb, but they're never not entertaining. Light and L are both evenly matched in terms of intelligence, which means gaining a single advantage over the other is enough to ensure victory, that advantage being information. Light's position as a school student puts him at a disadvantage, needing to balance his school life and his Kira one. His resources are limited, so he needs to understand how to fully utilize what he has at his disposal, opposed to L, who has unlimited resources, but is fighting an enemy that defies all logic, forcing L to dismantle his preconceptions about the world, in order to determine what Kira is capable of. This gives both L and Light the feeling that they are the underdog, who is desperately trying to topple a god. When they do execute a plan, it feels desperate and risky, because you understand the stakes. One wrong move or miscalculation, and they're dead. This in turn gives weight and significance to the information they do gain, no matter how minor it is. That information being used to launch their next attack. The two sort of entering a symbiotic relationship where they push each other to escalate their next encounter. And just to be blunt, it's really fun. Watching the lengths that these two will go to just to find out something like their dick size or something is exciting and engaging, and you're brought along for all of it. The internal monologuing may be a lot to some people, but it's necessary to follow their thought process so those final moments can really hit. And at the risk of jumping the gun here, something I rarely do by the way, I'm going to talk about a problem that Death Note has. One that is persistent throughout its entire run, and is kind of important to understand for the sake of enjoying Death Note. And that's the over-reliance on contrivances and characters just acting weird for the sake of plot progression. And as an example, I'll use my favourite moment from early Death Note, where Light needs to discover the identity of a woman he's just met in order to prevent her from delivering valuable Kira-related information to the police, while the two of them are walking to the police station with the express purpose of delivering that information. Light assumes that this is going to be an easy gig. After telling this lady that his father is the chief of police, she opens up to him. She tells Light her name as well as the valuable Kira-related information. When Light determines that the possibility of L learning this information is too big a risk, Light writes her name in the Death Note. Only for nothing to happen. Light deducing that the name must be fake. As she starts heading back towards the police station to deliver the info, Light panics. For the first time, we see Light express genuine fear as the clock starts ticking and the walls close in around him, and he desperately tries to think of a way to find out her name. At one point, just considering clocking her over the head and stealing her wallet. Every second he spends fretting and planning is time wasted. Every second he spends just awkwardly staring at her just raises her suspicion of him. So in a ditch effort, he just starts talking and talking, and like it's second nature to him, he lies and manipulates and lulls her into a false sense of safety, finally succeeding in learning Naomi's name and murdering her. And I love this moment because it shows how dangerous Light can be without the Death Note, and how he can quickly take control of a situation and steer it in his favor. In my first watching of Death Note, this part acted as a turning point in my opinion of Light. I know I'm slow on the uptake. It was in no doubt an exciting, impressive feat he accomplished, but the way he mocks Naomi and murders her in such a cruel way made me think, Light's a bit of a dick. But also, as good as I think this part is, it does require you to ignore the circumstances around this interaction. That being, Naomi and Light were already at the police station, and they just left, walked for an indescript amount of time, and then turned around and walked back. And while they are justifications for these actions, they are thin, making this whole scenario just feel artificially set up. And that's Death Note's biggest weakness. In order for the plot to progress, someone has to do something dumb. Death Note's impact on the anime sphere is immense, and I think it's two major things that make Death Note what it is. The layered and complex relationship of L and Light in a story that shows what shonen can do when it's not relying on physical violence. I would also be amiss not to mention the philosophical elements of Death Note. Over 20 years since its ending, people are still debating the ethics of using the Death Note. The correct answer is to use it. Death Note pulls you along with the promise that something big is going to happen next. Every episode or chapter feels like at any moment the water is going to boil over, and it keeps you on the edge, and invested on how it will end. And then Death Note does something really amazing. It gets bad. That uneasy feeling you get when a good show starts to turn sour is almost immediate. Before L's body is even cold, Nia and Mello show up, 4 years have passed, and we're told the two of them have independently caught up to L's investigation. Then they quickly assert themselves as Light's newest threat. It's weird to watch Death Note disrupt the status quo so much by killing off L, only for 2 episodes or 4 chapters later to undo it and revert to Light once again fighting a faceless and nameless super detective. Only there are 2 of them now. But there was an attempt to separate Light versus L and Light versus the successors. Nia and Mello aren't ganging up on Light, it's now a 3-way tussle. Because while Nia and Mello are here on some level to avenge L, they are also hostile to each other. Defeating Light to them means becoming the worthy successor to L. But Death Note severely underutilizes this dynamic. While it is set up as Light versus Nia versus Mello, all the attention is given to Nia and Light, severely minimizing Mello's involvement in the plot, inadvertently turning Light versus the successors into the early days of Death Note, with a less compelling L. And just to make matters worse, the very way Nia and Light function in the story makes their conflicts just not hit the same kind of highs. Nia and Mello both grew up together in the same orphanage that L attended. Yes, they're British, I think. The two of them are quickly recognized to be the most capable successors to L, should the unfortunate happen to him. But the two just don't get along. Well, it's more of a one-sided hatred. Nia actually likes Mello, but Mello is harboring an intense envy towards Nia, as he spent his whole life in Nia's shadow. So when the two of them are informed of L's death at the hands of Kira, they are asked to join forces, something that Mello can't accept, resulting in the two going their separate ways to find Kira themselves. Have you ever thought about it like their names should be like the other way round? Think about it, switch it around in your head. Mello should be Nia, because he's nearly completely insane, and Nia should be Mello because he's chill, like a melon. What's important to know about these two is what they represent, and that is the two halves of L. Think about everything you know about L. He's extremely intelligent, has fantastic deductive reasoning, and is bold and aggressive. All of these are traits that we can see shared between Nia and Mello. Nia possesses the intelligence, he's detached and approaches problems like something to be deciphered. and mellow is the aggression, willing to throw himself headfirst into any situation if it means he can come out on top. But this also means they lack what the other has, which is extremely important when fighting light. Nier is unwilling or unable to put himself at great risk and try something bold and dangerous. He can't even organize a flight by himself. He's restricted by what other people can do for him. Whereas Mello often overlooks the finer details and puts himself and others at avoidable risk, at one point costing his friend his life, because he didn't consider that a bunch of crazed Kira fanatics would shoot him. By the end, they both learn that in order to beat Light, they need to be both of these things: intelligent and willing to risk everything to get the edge to win. Well, the problem is, we already know this. We've just watched 25 episodes or 60 chapters of other characters learning this. The second half doesn't make any value in re-exploring this idea. Nothing new is learned or experienced. Instead, we're just retreading old ground, waiting for them to catch up to us. It's especially tedious since it's Nier we primarily follow. Let me ask you a question. Which part of early Death Note is the most memorable? If you said the chip scene, you're correct. Yes, it's dumb, but it encapsulates everything that was great about Death Note. We see Light utilize all of his resources to make that moment happen. Buying a small TV, resealing it in a bag of chips, where he sits, how he moves, what he's doing with his hands, even the detail that they're barbecue-flavored chips is important. It's satisfying and compelling to follow someone who is so active, watching each pulse of their plan unfold before ending in something memorable. Now think of your favorite moment from the latter parts of Death Note. If you immediately thought of Shino, you're a cultured individual. But if you thought about the rocket in the desert, or the raid on the Mafia base, or the car chase, those were all involving Mello. He's active, he's doing things, putting himself at risk, he's being entertaining. Mello is the one encapsulating everything that made the battles between Light and L so exciting. They're not perfect, but they are what Death Note is known for. Nier, on the other hand, is delegated to just sitting on the floor twiddling his hair, commanding other people to do things, and then they just do it. He doesn't push the bar further than it needs to go. And I get that that's his character. He's smart, but he's safe. Nier needs to learn that he has to be like Mello if he wants to defeat a seasoned detective slayer like Light, which he eventually does. For all his meticulous planning, he still fell short when it came to deceiving Light. It was Mello's unexpected kidnapping that gave Nier the edge to win. But again, to be blunt, it's just not that interesting watching Nier come to that conclusion. In most parts involving Nier, he's just sitting in his room playing with his toys, telling you that something smart is going to happen soon. And that's who we're going to see the most of. It actively hurts his character to watch him do nothing. And to make it worse, Light 2 is stuck in the same position. There's this really great part at the beginning of Death Note. Light is being stalked by the FBI agent Ray Pember, under the suspicion of being Kira, and this puts Light in a tough spot. If he kills Ray, that would draw suspicion towards himself. But if he did nothing, he might slip up and do something to out himself as Kira. To make matters worse, there are 11 FBI agents roaming around Japan, so Light devises a plan to wipe them all out in one single moment. First, Light orchestrates a bus hijacking in order to learn Ray Pember's name. Later, he tricks him into writing the names of all the agents on the page of the Death Note, killing them all. Before Ray ever learns what he did, Light murders him. Now this is the pinnacle of what Death Note is, a game of deceit and manipulation, suspicion, espionage and tomfoolery, and we're going to be following a master of its art. Later on in the series, another FBI agent shows up, and in order to find out his name, Light's dad Googles it, and the anime spells his name wrong. This happens because Light takes up the mantle of L, and with it its privileges, that being L's near limitless resources. Meaning, if Light needs information or wants something, he just gets it. Getting information and utilizing it to gain the upper hand was the entire point of Death Note. In the early parts, you felt the pressure that Light faced, how it forced him to adapt to his new surroundings, seeing him understand the Death Note, outmaneuver his opponents, and launch his own counterattacks. Everything came together to deliver these impactful moments. Now, Light just learns stuff off scene and delegates everything in a proxy war against Nia. It makes information seem less valuable. It might be important to Light in the story, but the audience isn't going to feel its significance because, frankly, he doesn't fight for it. When Light gets whatever he needs, it strips away a rather significant part of his character, his ingenuity and resourcefulness, and a significant part of what made Death Note compelling, elaborate plans and suspense. How are we supposed to get invested in what Light's newest plan is to defeat Nia if he doesn't do anything interesting? So what is left for Light to do? More often than not, Light's master strokes are just him manipulating a group of idiots to do things for him. And by manipulate, I mean he just tells them things and they believe it. The Kira investigation team has been with Light since the start. They trust him, so it's not unusual for them to side with him given the circumstances. But we've seen what Light is capable of when it comes to manipulation, with Misa, Naomi, and even L. Going from that to a group of people with the express purpose to make Light look smarter just feels flat. Light isn't given the opportunity to hit those highs as he was when he was battling L. Events in the story do escalate, but more so in a way to suddenly shock you with some wild, unpredictable outcome. Sudden twists and turns weren't all that made Death Note Death Note. It was the journey to get to those points that made them memorable. It's so unclear why he keeps the investigation team around. I don't even know what they do. Like, what are they investigating? There was one moment when a guy actually tried to do some investigating and he was told to stop. All they ever do is sit on their computers and listen to Light flirt with a girl. Like, sure, whatever. Who cares? It's also worth mentioning that the Death Note itself kind of stops being a tool for Light to use in the same way, because someone else has it. A different guy, Kira X, or who cares? Which makes the aforementioned possession rules of Death Note really confusing. Here's a tip for you writers. Don't write your story in such a way that people need to do homework, because I definitely won't do it. I hate homework. It was probably really hard to follow up what Death Note did with L and Light. In many ways, Death Note was L and Light. So when Nia and Mello are introduced, you wonder what could they possibly bring to Death Note. Unfortunately, not much. Light and Mello don't really interact. Light is aware of Mello's existence and considers him a threat, but the two don't talk. There's really not much to say. Which leaves Nia and Light. Nia has a lot of personality, and I do like him. He's quiet, aloof, juvenile in his demeanor. He uses politeness to mask mockery, something that gets under Light's skin almost immediately. I love how he pulls these little cartoon faces when he knows he's got someone. It's clear that he's L, but without the professionalism. And the anime doesn't do him justice. If someone calls Nia a lesser L, they only watch the anime. It could be argued that Light at the very least had a microcosm of respect for L, but Light hates Nia. Nia comes into Light's world immediately swinging, undermining his position as the new L and declaring that he is there to stop Kira. His arrogance and blunt way of speaking immediately gets under Light's skin and begins to shake his pride, and Nia begins to remind him more and more of L. It's a strong start, invoking feelings of Light and L's first meeting. Once again, an unknown threat has its eyes firmly planted on Light. And this one seems different, more detached, unpredictable, and dangerous. The two entering a kind of, we both know what's going on here, so don't bother playing dumb. only really pretending to be cordial to each other for the sake of keeping up appearances. Light through gritted teeth trying to bring down someone who dared enter the realm of a god. So does Nier fill the gap that L left? Not quite. I don't think it's a fault of Nier as a character, or how he interacts with Light. I think it's more about how the story treats him. I felt that Death Note was always diminishing him by constantly comparing him to L, reminding us that this is still a battle between Light and L. Nier is just an extension of L. We don't see the same kind of characterization and development in Nier, or Mello for that matter, like we did with L, making the relationship with Light feel thin. I'm not expecting the same level of complexity that Light and L had, but it would have been nice for Death Note to not be so afraid of embracing Nier. And Mello. Mello as well. A youthful duo who aren't playing by Light's preconceived fighting etiquette might have been what Death Note needed in its twilight years. Overall, I feel it's a definite step down. It also doesn't help that Nier is written in such a way that all you can do is demonstrate the worst parts of L. If your heart is back in episode 25 or chapter 59, I think, waiting for someone to pick it up again and carry it to the end, Nier and Mello won't do that. I also think that Nier is a victim of the overall quality drop of Death Note. By this point, Death Note is feeling tired. The story has been dragging on, and the things that made the series great are just not hitting those same heights as before. So of course, you're going to look at Light, and then you're going to look at Nier, and think, the new thing must be the problem. So as much as I like him, I completely understand when people call him a lesser L, and it doesn't help that Death Note's weaker moments are far more pronounced in the latter part of the series. More so in the anime, which condenses the last 50 chapters of Death Note into 12 episodes, resulting in half-baked explanations, confusing plot changes, and of course that one infamous scene where Nier discovers the identity of Light's second-hand man by watching TV. This moment isn't any less contrived in the manga, but it is easier to follow Nier's reasoning. I guess all of this falls to the author. Although I haven't really read it, I heard his newer work, Platinum End, falls flat at the last stretch. But who am I to say? I can't end things properly either.